In this chapter, we will talk about recovered paper supply and demand issues and associated volatility of the price. Looking at the simple economics 101, on the y-axis here I have the ratio of demand over supply, and on the x-axis we have the current price of particular grade divided by the so-called equilibrium price. Equilibrium price can be the average of the price of that particular grade over the last 12 months or 2 years, to give you some idea of what the price fluctuations are. So we take the average of last 1 year, for example, and call that the equilibrium price. When the demand and supply are in balance, the ratio is 1, and we go to the price, corresponding price is also close to the equilibrium price, and so that ratio is also 1, and so we are at this particular location. Now what happens if suddenly the demand increases and supply remain the same? So let's consider the scenario 1 where the demand is greater than the supply. What happens to the price of the recovered paper? The price becomes greater than the equilibrium price. In other words, we move from this particular point to somewhere in this quadrant where the demand over supply ratio is greater than 1, and correspondingly current price is greater than the equilibrium price. Now what happens when the price becomes very high? People react to that by doing one of several things. When the price is relatively high, those who are in the business of collecting and supplying the recovered paper to the paper mills figure out ways to collect more paper because they are able to get more money for it. So they will try and figure out ways to increase the supply of the paper available to the mill. Paper mills, on the other hand, will figure out how to survive by consuming less recovered paper. They may switch to virgin fiber or to different grade in order to reduce the demand for the specific grade. In other words, all approaches are to reduce the demand so as to catch up with the supply, or to increase the supply to catch up with the demand, so that we go back to the equilibrium point. So you reduce the ratio of demand over supply by reducing the demand or increasing the supply, or both, and you go down to lower price, and you can continue in this way till you approach the equilibrium point. If you take another scenario where supply is greater than demand, there is too much paper in the market and demand is just not that much. In that case, the result is, of course, that the price will go down below the equilibrium point. And again, you will be going in this direction, and question for you to decide as a homework exercise, so to say, is what will be the reaction? What will people do so as to change this scenario so that supply and demand are again in balance? So in this particular case, people will react so that supply will decrease, people won't collect as much, or the demand will increase. Paper mills will think that now the paper is reasonably priced, so let us consume more recovered paper, and accordingly the demand will increase and catch up with the supply, and again the price will go back towards the equilibrium price. So this is one of the simple laws of supply and demand, and of course the things are much more complicated, and question is how much time it will take for supply to catch up with the demand or vice versa, and how the equilibrium price will change over the years. That depends on many factors. Depends on the overall global economy and inflation and many other factors that will determine what will be the corresponding equilibrium price. Switching back to various grades of recovered papers, just as we have many choice for the virgin fiber, it can come from softwood or hardwood of many different species. Just like that, we have many choices for recovered paper grades. There are many different grades classified as post-consumer or pre-consumer, and within each you have old corrugated containers, old newspaper, old magazine, boxboard clipping, envelope clipping, and so on. We have many choices of different recovered paper grades, and depending on what we are making, we can accordingly select the right grade of recovered paper. Here is a rough guideline of what type of recovered paper grades are used in what final product. So linerboard, for example, is made from old corrugated containers or double line kraft clipping, or from unbleached softwood kraft pulp. Newsprint made from groundwood pulp, mechanical pulp, or from recycled paper from old newspaper and old magazine, and so on down the line. In early 90s, people thought that we may run out of landfill, and therefore we should start using more recovered paper. And correspondingly, many municipalities get into the business of collecting the paper. And we started collecting more and more papers, increasing from 42.2 million tons in 1995 to 50 plus million tons in 2004. Or from the base of percent recovered, based on how much we produce, our recovery rate has increased from 44 to close to 50%. So in general, we are recovering more paper and sending relatively less amount to the landfill. There is significant amount of demand for our papers from overseas, from countries like South Korea, India, Japan, and China. So here is some information of how the total global consumption of recovered paper is about 200 million tons, and recovered paper consumption in China is going to be continue to grow. Recovered paper from United States is in great demand because of the high quality of our recovered paper, and correspondingly people overseas really like the recovered paper from United States, and the demand is pretty high, and that is relatively somewhat hard for the US paper mills to have enough supply of recovered paper. American Forest and Paper Association has set a goal to increase the recovery rate, which is currently at 50% to 55% by 2012. I should point out that recovery rate of old corrugated containers and old newspapers is very close to the practical maximum of about 73%. And therefore, the additional source of the fiber will come from most likely residential mixed paper. The problem with the mixed paper is that many municipalities are going towards commingle collection, and by commingle collection I mean collecting not only newspapers, magazines and boxes, but also plastic and glass bottle and aluminum containers. And that creates havoc with the paper industry recycling paper because of the contaminants like glass, metal, plastic and stickies. Bill Sasia from Weyerhaeuser presented a very good example of what is the effect of commingle collection on the overall performance of the recycling mills. So if you look at the old newspapers, in the period 1997 to 1999, the outthrows were about 0.5% or lower and glass was just non-existent, whereas currently you get about 5.7% outthrows, 1.3% prohibitive and about 0.1% glass. 0.1% glass may not appear too much, but it really creates a lot of problem when you are consuming 500 tons of paper per day. 0.1% comes to about half a ton of glass per day. What do you do with this material? It increases the wear and tear on the paper machine equipment. So for example, here maintenance cost increases by a factor of 4. Because of these prohibitives and outthrows, the yield loss increases from 1% to 9.5%. That means you have to buy additional recovered paper, and correspondingly your paper consumption goes up by 23,000 tons per year. The cost of this additional fiber increases by about $2 million. The amount of stickies coming to the mill increases from 35 count in 97-99 period compared to now when you have commingle collection. The stickies increased to 57. The cost of these additional stickies is about $2 per ton extra. So commingle collection has created a lot of problem. One of the irony of recycling is that as we try to consume more and more recovered paper, the demand goes up, the price goes up, but the quality almost always goes down. And that is one of the biggest challenge of the paper mill, is to how to obtain dependable supply of consistent quality raw material at a reasonable price. One unwritten rule in the recycling is that if you accept anything that the supplier sends you, you are bound to get anything. And all you have to do is ask the paper mill pulper operator to see what kinds of things they find in the recovered paper bale, and you can get all kinds of stories. In order to improve the quality of recovered paper, you have to communicate your needs to the supplier. You have to tell them what you cannot use and what is giving you too much problem. And in order to communicate effectively, you have to regularly inspect the recovered paper. Many people say, what do we mean by recovered quality, recovered paper quality? It can be freeness due to the strength problem on the final product, or in large number of cases contaminants are the major problem. Wax, plastic, stickies, groundwood content, amount of ash can be a problem, in some cases brightness or wet strength. So you want to know what is the major problem, select one of the parameters and inspect that in different bales. You should do this systematically once and then periodically over time to maintain the recovered paper quality. And we have to develop flexibility to be able to utilize different grades when there is a fiber crunch. So very good article in the book, in the chapter is written by Dr. Putz on recyclability test for different paper. So debate about pre-consumer versus post-consumer, We won't go into detail of that, but as far as the recycling mill is concerned, we have to go through similar process. For example, over-issue newspaper is classified as pre-consumer, whereas once we read the paper and throw it away for recycling, that is called post-consumer. As far as the paper recycling mill is concerned, they have to go through the same process of removing ink, whether it is pre-consumer or post-consumer. So that particular differentiation does not make too much sense in many cases. In summary, paper mills have a choice of many recovered paper grades, but due to current situation, they may not have as much freedom as they used to have before. And therefore, it is better to establish a very good working relationship with the paper supplier. And in order to be able to communicate effectively with the supplier, you need to establish a good database about the quality of different recovered paper grade in order to ensure that you get a proper quality raw material and you are paying accordingly for that. So with that, we'll conclude this chapter on recovered paper quality, supply and demand.